Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond 20's webinar, Why Your Employees Are Your Biggest Security Risk and How to Fix It. My name is Jade Kendrick. I am an analyst here at Beyond 20, and with me today, I have Mark Hilliard. He's a Senior Advisor, Information Security Manager, and Certified Trainer with ISC Squared, ISACA, and CompTIA here at Beyond 20. Mark has spent 20 years in system administration and architecture. He has designed, built, and maintained the largest commercial public key infrastructure system on the planet, a mouthful. At Beyond 20, we offer ITIL assessments, ITSM process design, IT cost consulting, strategic planning, and many training and certifications in ITIL, Agile, and project management, just to name a few. And of course, we also have security classes such as CISSP and Security Plus. So please consider taking this time in quarantine and joining us for some virtual cybersecurity training. There's no better time than the present. Okay, and with no further ado, Mark, if you want to go through the agenda and let's get the party started.
Absolutely, thank you, Jade. Again, my name is Mark Hilliard. I'm a Senior Advisor here at Beyond 20. Today we're going to be talking primarily about employees as an attack surface within our cybersecurity and information security practices. We'll be spending some time first talking about social engineering, why it continues to be effective. A little bit about social engineering during COVID-19. The pandemic has certainly spawned its own challenges for security as we all work from home and try to secure our workforces that way. We'll talk about a few of the ways that we can eliminate or at least reduce the risk and attack surface that our employees pose. We'll talk a little bit about personal responsibility. Those of us who are employees, which all of us are, we also bear some responsibility as far as helping to secure ourselves, our information, as well as that of our companies. And then, as Jade said, we'll have a few minutes at the end to answer questions you may have. If we don't get to all of the questions, we'll certainly follow up with you all after the webinar, along with links for the recording of the webinars. We are going to be recording today to try to answer those more fully for you. So quite a few logos up here. One of the really unfortunate things that all of these particular companies have in common is they have all had a breach of some kind in the past couple of years, and the vast majority of them were due to some level of social engineering, which is pretty amazing considering the names that you see up on the screen right now. Social engineering is still probably one of the most common ways that attackers, black hats as we call them, gain access to information, breach, and then ultimately exfiltrate data from organizations. It is not uncommon for that to be the first vector, which is then of course followed up by more technically advanced ways of hacking and getting access into various systems within our organizations. So first off, what is social engineering? So at its core, it's basically using some level of deception to manipulate an individual or several individuals into divulging confidential or personal information. Ultimately, the goal against most organizations there is to gain access to more confidential or secret information, be it within corporations to get at financial or maybe corporate company secrets. If it's government, of course, it's to get at probably highly sensitive or confidential, even secret documents and data that can then be used for political purposes. There are a few very basic types of social engineering, the most common of which, of course, is what we call phishing. Phishing is a way of essentially sending emails in some sort of spoofed or deceptive manner in order to gain access to someone's information, be it to get them to download a piece of malware, which can then of course lead to again access and breach, or maybe it is to divulge some level of information, personal financial information, in order to steal money, or even just to steal identities. So phishing is a huge problem, and we are all very susceptible to it. And we'll talk about and show a few examples of how that actually works here today. Pretexting, basically the ability of sort of the coming in with the sense that something is urgent or we need you to get this done. Oftentimes this comes along with an authoritative request or demand from some spoofed address or some hacked email address from upper management or leadership. Usually a sense of urgency or some level of threat involving fear comes from one of these. Baiting is much like actual phishing. We use some interesting terms in the InfoSec world, but baiting is really just sort of making a promise of something, right? Promise that, hey, you're going to get some sort of benefit from this, or something bad will happen if you don't do this thing. But baiting is a very common way that especially individuals get socially engineered. If you click on this, your friend, the Nigerian prince, will send you millions of dollars. That's a pretty common baiting scheme. Quid pro quo, something for something else, right? If you provide me with this information, you will get something in return, similar to baiting in that way. And then finally, tailgating. Tailgating is more physical in nature. It's not, these other ones are usually electronic or voice-based in some fashion, but tailgating is much more physical. And this one's pretty pervasive. There's an entire almost sort of security industry around doing physical penetration testing where, the idea is that I show up and look like I belong, right? I look like a delivery person or a maintenance person, or maybe I look like a nice vendor who should be coming in the building with you. And I either follow you in directly behind you as you get legitimate access and I walk in behind you, or frequently I'll come up to a doorway and maybe I'll have all my hands full with boxes because I'm a delivery person from FedEx. Or some other, some other delivery service, and I've got a whole armful of boxes, and I just say, hey, can you let me in so I can get through the door? And lo and behold, most of us wanting to be helpful people, oh yeah, your arms are full. It's probably a pain and heavy, and let me help you get in, right? So that's a very common physical social engineering technique that a lot of attackers use. So how effective is social engineering? Pretty darn effective. According to APWG and Proofpoint, 88% of organizations around the world experienced some level of spear phishing attempt in 2019. That means that spear phishing is happening all the time. Now, spear phishing is a special type of phishing where we're looking for a specific group or a specific specific node to attack. Phishing in general is, it's distributed. Usually it's very generalized, but spear phishing is usually very localized. It's got a special purpose. Sometimes we may target a specific group that may have a level of interest in what I am offering, quote unquote, in my baiting schemes, or it may be specific to, we're going to go after the finance department directly, right? We're just going to spear phish. We're going to phish people in the finance department. So it's a very specific type, but it's also very, very prevalent, as it points out in the statistic. Nearly 90% of organizations experience some level of spear phishing. We, my own organization included, see a lot of this coming through on a regular basis. That second statistic is maybe the more terrifying one. 65% of U.S. organizations experienced some level of successful phishing attack in 2019. That is a staggering number when you think about it. That's a statistic that sends chills down the spine of not just me as a security person, but most of my leadership as well. We are a small consultancy. We don't have thousands of employees, but the idea that well over half of all organizations are successfully phished in some fashion, which means some level of data is exposed, is something that should give all of us some pause. Understanding that phishing attacks are also very expensive. Social engineering in general, successful attacks costing $17,000+ every minute. Every minute of every day. That's a substantial sum of money. So you can also see the draw as to why people would continue to utilize this particular attack vector to get access to things. That's a very profitable way of breaking the law. Data breaches, anytime you actually have some level of exfiltration of data or exposure of confidential data, averaging at $3.92 million per organization. For some organizations, that's an annual budget for small companies. So thinking of that as an average is pretty scary as well. The average BEC wire transfer attempt, BEC being an email, a compromised email, or spoofed email, something that your CEO suddenly sends over an urgent message for you to wire transfer money to XYZ corporation. Here's all the information. You need to do it right now. We owe them a bunch of money and we're behind. Every successful or every attempt there in 2020, in the first quarter of this year, was for an average of $54,000. It's kind of crazy, right? And if you consider, going back to the fact that 65% of organizations experience some level of successful phishing attack, that's a lot of money being transferred. So there's a huge financial burden here. This is one of those things where every organization is struggling to keep up with an ever increasing number of attackers and ever increasing sophistication of attacks. The irony is that phishing is generally not super sophisticated. Why is it effective? Well, the effectiveness of social engineering and phishing in particular depends really on three primary motivations: greed, fear, and urgency. Urgency is probably the one that, as a business, we probably are most susceptible to, right? If I get something in my business email account that's promising me millions of dollars, if I do something, probably going to look at that pretty skeptically. So my greed factor is probably relatively low as a business user. Now, personally, of course, if you get something in your personal email account that shows, some kind of benefit from clicking on a link or downloading an attachment, then chances are, you're going to be more susceptible to that kind of attack. Greed is something that does drive us personally. Urgency, usually from a business standpoint, is the more effective means, right? We've got to get this done right now. Right. The idea here is to say this must be done so quickly that you don't have time to really review this or ask any questions, because once you start asking questions, of course, the scheme breaks down. Chances of it actually working go down pretty substantially. Fear is another one that is really effective in both personal and professional settings, right? The idea that if you don't do something bad will happen. Right, I get a message from my boss that says you must do this right now or else. Chances are I'm going to want to do that thing because I want to avoid any sort of punishment or negative consequences from not handling whatever's being asked of me. And personally, of course, frequently we get things. A lot of the time these come through voice. We've had a lot of the what is sort of so-called vishing or voice phishing. Sure. Most of you at one point or another in the past few years has gotten some sort of phone call where they tell you that, that the IRS is coming for you. They're going to take all of your assets because you owe them thousands of dollars and you need to call this number right away and provide them with all your personal information. These are amazingly effective.
Mark, I think this is super interesting. I actually received 2 emails inviting me to join the Illuminati last week. And while I like to think that those were legitimate, they did touch on every single one of these categories: greed, fear, and urgency. It was very urgent that I join the Illuminati. I was afraid not to, and I so badly wanted to do it.
Sure, absolutely. Who doesn't want to be a member of the Illuminati? It's absolutely true. And while we could look at that and feel like, oh, that's, we're smart people, right? The Illuminati, believe or not, we hear plenty of people joke about that idea that, there's an Illuminati out there, and but the reality is that one of the things that that phishing relies so heavily on, these kinds of attacks rely heavily on, these 3 factors are certainly big ones, but they also rely on volume, right? Those 2 emails that you got last week, Jade, probably went to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of other people, right? They don't need to get everyone to click on the link. They just need a few people to click on the link. You know, if the average attack is actually, you know, costing close to $20,000, the average successful attack is close to $20,000. You know, if I'm just one guy sitting in my basement, you know, buying email lists, how many people do I really need to click on that link to make a pretty decent profit margin, right? I mean, at 20 grand a pop, oh, you know, okay, let's see, $20,000, I don't know, 10 of those, that's, you know, there's 200 grand.
I might be in for a career change. That's a lot of money.
Now, let's don't go there. But it's true. You know, it is based on the idea of volume, right? A phishing attack of that nature is going to definitely be successful at scale, right? If I send it to 50 people, I would want all 50 of those people to click on it, but I don't need 50. I may need 50 people to click on it, but I'm sending it to 500,000 people. So 50 is a very, very small percentage of that number. So, you know, convincing 50 out of 500,000 that not only does the Illuminati exist, but you really should join up, is a much lower bar than, you know, targeting 50 individual people and hoping that all of them believe in the Illuminati and are willing to, you know, and are willing to click on your link. And this is how most phishing attacks actually work, right? It's if I send an email to, you know, 30 companies and I get one to respond and I make 20 grand, that's kind of nice. But if I send it to 300 companies and I get 10 to respond, suddenly my profits go way up. And that's the, you know, that of course is probably one of the biggest drives behind these phishing attacks. The other big one that you get out of it is not just greed to steal, right? I mean, it's not just necessarily theft of, you know, direct theft of money. It's theft of information, theft of data. Last week, those of you who utilize the company Garmin in any way, whether you have an activity tracker, smartwatch that you wear, or you use their GPS systems in your car, or your personal airplane, which actually a lot of small plane pilots were hit by this, but Garmin was hit with a ransomware attack by a fairly notorious Russian hacking gang called Evil Corp. Ransomware, of course, has become more and more common. It's been around for quite some time, but ransomware is a way of a hacker getting access to your systems and encrypting all of your data and then holding it for ransom. If you don't pay me, I'm going to delete all your data, or I'm going to expose a bunch of company or private data to the world. But you are in the interim, while your data is encrypted, you have no access to it as a company. So of course, not only do you have this hanging over your head that your data may be stolen, may be exposed, or may be deleted, in the interim, you have no access to your stuff. And that's a bad thing. Garmin itself went down. If anyone here has experienced this, it happened on July 23rd, and they just in the last couple of days really started coming back online. They're not even fully back up, I don't even think yet. But this was huge. And you know, a ransomware attack doesn't generally start because there's some, you know, crazy infiltration of systems that's, you know, through a series of created backdoors. It's not like the movies, right? The reality of hacking is that, you know, most of the time it happens because someone inadvertently downloaded malware, and that malware opened a back door that allowed the hackers to just walk right in. Right, that's the part that is maybe the most terrifying, is that all it takes is one person accidentally downloading a small Trojan virus, Trojan horse virus or something like that, or some kind of rat, remote access Trojan, and all it takes is that one person doing that in the organization, and the hacker has full access right away. So, you know, Garmin, you know, there was allegedly a $10 million ransom. There is no indication yet as to whether or not that ransom was paid. There are a whole bunch of sort of legal and political ramifications around that particular attack, because Evil Corp is actually listed as a terrorist organization. The federal government has sanctions against them, which means, paying them would actually be against the law in the United States. There's a whole lot of other stuff that goes on with that, but at the core of it all is this massive multinational corporation, Garmin, who has an inordinate amount of very personal data about people. When you figure that Garmin is at its core a GPS-based company, right? They do global positioning systems, which means that all of their data has, where was Mark on Tuesday at 10 a.m.? Where was Mark on Wednesday at 2:30 p.m.? It has all that data in its stores, which means if that data were to be stolen by Evil Corp, by this particular gang, and then sold on the black market, there could be huge, huge ramifications on privacy, personal identity theft, and some people who use Garmin devices are not, are sort of high value targets, if you will, right? I mean, this is kind of a roundabout way to get to possibly high level government officials who might use Garmin's devices, high level corporate officials and executives that may use Garmin devices. Understanding the patterns of their movements based on this GPS data could be invaluable to, to those who would do us harm. So again, that it was likely someone within the Garmin Corporation who inadvertently opened a door through clicking on possibly an otherwise innocuous link. And at the time, it may not have even shown up as anything bad. It may not have even tripped their security systems when it happened. So, when it happened, how it happened, those sorts of things, they're doing a lot of, I'm sure Garmin is spending inordinate amounts of time now doing, all sorts of investigation and research as to how this actually occurred. But that kind of threat is very real and usually starts with something as simple as phishing. So, so it's not just somebody trying to get you to, wire a bunch of money to a Nigerian prince. While that is still a very damaging financial thing for individuals, it goes much, much deeper than that. Most effective means. We talk about most social engineering as someone sort of masquerading as someone else. The most effective way to do that is to masquerade as a boss. Right, the CEO has sent me something. Right, we get this actually. I will tell you at Beyond 20, we get this email at least once a month for somebody, and it's usually somebody new, of course, who gets this email. But it comes from our CEO that says, "Hey, I'm in a meeting right now, but can you please send me XYZ information via text? Here's the number to send it to." Now, it's obviously not from our actual CEO. This is a phishing attempt, but it's somebody who is usually, it's usually the people who are relatively new to the company who kind of freak out. Oh, Eric is asking for something. We must do it right now. And they thankfully, we have everyone asking the question, which is part of security awareness, which we're going to talk about today. But hey, what is this? What should I do? The reality is what they're trying to do is they're trying to get personal information out of that person about the company that they can then use as another way of infiltrating the company, right? We get this email all the time. It's super simple. It's all text. All there is just a phone number for you to text a series of data to, right? Send me this information. And it looks like it's coming from the CEO. Now, it's a very simplistic attack. Right? We can look at it and go, oh, well, okay, that's a spoofed email address. Well, it says it actually has our CEO's name on it. The actual email address is some entirely different organization. It's not our domain name. It's coming from somewhere else. So it's not a particularly sophisticated attack. But again, you can see it's in its simplicity how enticing it would be, especially for a new employee who's hoping to, impress the boss and make everybody think they're a big team player and they're gonna pull their weight. Would look at that and at first glance go, I better take care of this right now. I got to do that. The interesting thing is this is exacerbated these days with the fact that most of us are working from home, that we're not sitting in an office 10 feet away from that person where we can just go, did you just send me this email? Now we're all working from home, which means I don't really know what my CEO is doing or where she might be in this very moment. She very well may be in a meeting. Right, so I do have to I have to maintain vigilance when I see something like that and reach out to her and say, hey, did you just send me an email? And if she responds, yes, I need you to do that, well, then I know it's probably legitimate. But, if she's like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about, then I can know better than to respond to it. But again, it's such a simple thing, right? This level of authority, because, I want to do what my boss tells me. That's part of being an employee. And so impersonating an authority figure is hugely effective in the workplace when it comes to phishing, baiting, any sort of pretexting, saying, this is from your boss. The boss is telling you this, or the finance department is demanding that you provide them with your bank account information because payroll is in 2 days, and and they don't have the right info for you, or something like that. Those sorts of things give people that sense of urgency, but also a little bit of that sense of fear about, oh, this person has authority over me and I need to respond to them quickly. It shortens our attention span as to, could something wrong be going on here? Could this be the wrong thing? So let's talk about that. Twitter. Surely everyone has heard by now that Twitter was the victim of a rather substantial social engineering attack, which exposed and stole the accounts of some very, very high-ranking officials in various organizations. One of them was Jeff Bezos, and you can see here this image of his tweet. I've decided to give back. Any Bitcoin sent to the address below will be sent back doubled. He's doing a maximum of $50 million. Wow. I'm sure the people who initially saw that were like, wow, I wish I had some Bitcoin. I'd go and double my money. And some people tried. Interestingly, and thankfully, most people didn't. A lot of people don't even have Bitcoin, so that doesn't, that they're unable to actually respond to this in any way. But this is essentially an extortion scheme, right? I'm basically leveraging this highly public figure who is known to be extremely rich. So, the idea that Jeff Bezos might, in the middle of the pandemic, just get a wild hair and decide, hey, I'm gonna just give money away. For some people, again, it's running on that little bit of greed factor for us. We're like, ooh, Jeff Bezos is going to give me money. That's awesome. I want Jeff Bezos to give me money. Sure, I'll send you $50 in Bitcoin to get $100 in Bitcoin back. Why not? It seems like a win-win situation. And I'm looking at what is a legitimate site, right? I know that I'm at Twitter. I know that this is Jeff Bezos' account. It's got the little blue check mark, which means it's definitely Jeff Bezos, because Twitter does, all of their due diligence to ensure that, those verified accounts are truly verified. At least that's what they tell us. And so, it gives a huge air of legitimacy to this particular attack. So the attack was on Twitter, but really what the attack was on Twitter users. At the end of the day, the social engineering aspect of this wasn't even necessarily that Twitter got compromised and that these accounts were actually stolen and given over to a hacking group, but that the gang then socially engineered actual users of Twitter to just send them money. Give me some cash. Surprisingly, only, I believe at last count, it was less than $30,000 total was actually sent. So it ended up being a relatively innocuous attack for the user base of Twitter. It was a huge deal for Twitter as a company, right? You're like, oh, well, Twitter is vulnerable. And then it came to light that somebody let leak that the actual breach was because there were some folks inside the Twitter realm, actual users, admins within Twitter, who had very easy to guess passwords, and then were then basically socially engineered themselves in order to give up enough information to allow the hackers in to do what they did. That there were a whole lot of things that went wrong there, right? You had simple passwords. That's a bad thing. That's both on both on those admins, but also on their policies for passwords. Shouldn't have passwords that are easy to guess, but also that their regular accounts, just their standard login account to whatever whatever directory they use, whether it's Active Directory or some other thing, Okta, their regular accounts had high-level administrative privileges. This is also obviously a huge failure on policy, because you shouldn't have that. Anyone who works in security will tell you, you should have separate administrator accounts from your normal account, for a lot of reasons, but this is definitely one of them. It's a failure on their own management not to be paying attention to this stuff well enough. Right? Their security management system didn't do its job. So there was a whole lot of failures in here. And one of the folks that I personally follow on Twitter, an information security expert, mentioned, which I found kind of ironic and funny at the time, was, how much fun must it be to work in security at Twitter right now and having to do incident response with hundreds of millions of people watching. It's hard enough to do security incident response without anybody there standing over your shoulder, but to have the entire customer base of Twitter basically live tweeting a security breach of this magnitude just must have been awful for those folks. So again, very simple. There was no complicated, super high-tech, Mission Impossible, hanging from a ceiling, pressure plate hacking skills going on here. This was a simple, they got enough open source intelligence, what we call open source intelligence, or OSINT. This is publicly available, totally legally obtained information about people working at Twitter, finding out what their job roles were. I mean, they could have found out a lot of this stuff just on LinkedIn, right? They could have figured out who these people were just by easy searches on Google. They could have gotten a ton of info about them. Then they could have found their own social media accounts. They could have started trolling through to find information that they could use to manipulate them. It's one of those things. Yeah.
What about now? What about during this pandemic? I mean, I can only imagine people have come up with all sorts of scams and misinformation to pull people in.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So going beyond Twitter, which did not have anything to do with the pandemic, there have been a myriad ways that people are leveraging the pandemic. Help desk, we have some examples here actually on these slides. So a help desk impersonation. This is a pretty standard phishing attempt, basically leveraging people's fear around coronavirus, right? See below the new update on the coronavirus report, how to prevent it from affecting a staff member. They've got obviously some redacted stuff here, but they've got to click here to confirm non-removal of your email. Because, we're going to take down your email account. That's weird, but there's a sense of urgency here. There's a sense of fear. Something's going on and we have to deactivate what's going on. This seems very technical. Okay, sure, let me click here to make sure they don't delete my email account. That all seems incredibly legitimate just at first glance. And again, they're leveraging this fear around the pandemic to get people to not pay attention to the telltale signs. First off, your help desk should never do this. But secondly, you can start looking at various signs in here. Some of it, you should always confirm this kind of thing, right? First off, they're just using a username, right? This isn't even the person's actual name. T. Jenkins. Well, Jenkins is probably their last name. What's their first name? You'd think that your help desk would know your actual name, but nope, just T. Jenkins. That right there is a dead giveaway for me. Now, it may not be for your employees. So again, you have to make sure that you are providing them with that kind of information. What sorts of things. Don't click on links in emails, even if they appear to be coming from an internal source, right? If you get a link from, a link even from somebody internally, shouldn't be clicking on it unless you can verify what it's for. Just a simple announcement. This one actually had, the actual email had attachments to it. There's nothing in the email itself to click on, but there were attachments here. Again, just sort of things around cases of COVID in New Zealand. St. Elizabeth Healthcare established incident management. Basically, go here and click on the attachments in this email to see what you can do to protect yourself. Well, that seems legitimate. That seems like something I want to do. Who would send me something horrible about that? Well, guess what? This was another one where you were actually downloading a virus downloading a virus about the virus. But yeah, this actually had you downloading and opening a piece of malware, and yet still looking very legitimate. Safety measures, yet another. This one is even more so, right? We have a link, an embedded link in the email to download a document, what looks to be a PDF. And they can put wrappers around this so that you can't even really tell, even if you hovered over the link. Again, should not be clicking on links. Specialist Wuhan virus advisory. Wow, that sounds very, very official. But again, basically getting you to download malware by leveraging the coronavirus, the pandemic, to do that. People's fear is being played on. And these have expanded. These have expanded tenfold, hundredfold in some areas where they feel that people are particularly susceptible to this sort of thing. So yeah, the coronavirus has really expanded coronavirus-related spam, phishing attempts. I mean, it is spam, but these are actual phishing attempts by gangs trying to get information or get access. Again, what we talked about earlier. Sometimes it's to get info, sometimes it's to get access to get more info. So what do we do? I mean, at the end of the day, you know, there are plenty of technical measures we can put in place, right? Spam filters, phishing filters, there are myriad vendors out there who will happily sell you applications, and you should definitely be looking into those. If you don't have those now, you should be looking into ways to protect yourself technically, right? There are definitely technologies out there that do a great deal of help, but they don't stop all of it. At the end of the day, phishers are also, you know, these attackers are also very sophisticated in understanding how those programs work, because they have access to those programs too, right? They can figure out the ways around, they can find the loopholes, they can, they can discover the ways to get through. So it's not always, technology is a big part of it, but it's not everything. There are three basic tenets that I have around how do we get our employees to become less of a threat. And we're talking about mostly inadvertent threats. Obviously, some employees out there, hopefully none of our employees, but some employees out there do have a reason to try to actually attack their own companies. That's a whole separate subject for a different day. We're talking about inadvertent threats, right? I'm clicking on something accidentally. So the first thing, awareness training. Train. Never stop training. It's an interesting thing. Organization that does this sort of thing is they're into awareness training, so they may be slightly biased, but their own internal studies have shown that those organizations that stop their awareness training or pause their awareness training for some period of time almost immediately start to see a slip in successful detection of attacks. That people start to get lazy, they start to get complacent. They stop paying attention to the banners that tell them that an email is coming from an outside source, and don't click on unknown email links. So train often, train early. Make sure you have some sort of onboarding training for security awareness. Understand the policies that we have in place. Understand how to spot social engineering attacks, and then run exercises. You should definitely be running social engineering exercises. Send some phishing emails to your own organization. Don't do it as a way to punish. Never do it as a way to punish, because that is not the way to get people on board and get people excited about actually detecting attacks and reporting on them. Right? If you use it as a punitive stick, then people will react accordingly. Which is not good. And that's not what you want. But you do want to do occasional phishing attacks. You do want to leave that USB key just sitting out on a conference table for a few days to see who picks it up and plugs it into their computer, right? These things that certainly attackers will use to get access. We want to run dry runs. We want to get people aware and just keep them kind of on their toes. Make sure that they're aware that this stuff is always happening. But in a better controlled environment for us, right? If I send the phishing email and you click on the link, well, there's not any damage that's actually done, but it lets me know, oh, I should probably sit down with that person and say, hey, you clicked on the link in this email, why, right? Understanding why they did it, is a good way for us to better train going forward, and perhaps even tune some of our technical controls to keep it from happening going forward. So understanding why and then explaining why it's important that they don't do that, going forward, so that we can protect our organization. Transparency. This is where our security teams tend to fall down. We like to keep things close to the vest because security is all about being secure. Well, I'm here to tell you, if you don't tell your people when an attack has occurred, they're never going to know. And so they're never really going to take it that seriously. If you don't think it's actually happening, or you aren't made aware that it's actually happening to you, you are less likely to be concerned about it ever happening. So if an attack is reported, make sure everybody's aware. Hey, guess what? We were attacked. Successful or not, right? Even if it was an unsuccessful attempt, say, hey, you know what? This happened, and I want to give kudos to everybody who helped to stop it, right? We were successfully attacked, and here is what we're doing to make sure that that never happens again. But awareness is important internally. Some companies, data breaches must be reported. There are regulatory reasons for that, legal reasons for that. Private companies don't necessarily have to disclose these things, and you don't necessarily have to go public with successful or unsuccessful attacks against your organization unless you're required to by law. But internally, your folks should know, and they should have, of course, also have signed confidentiality agreements, making sure that they're not going and making that public knowledge. That should be a part of your leadership's plan for how to handle this sort of thing. As I mentioned earlier, successful social engineering depends heavily on the volume. We want to have, if you want to do social engineering, you're going to have to do it at scale to be truly successful and profitable. So recognizing that everyone in our organization needs to be consistently trained and made aware of what's going on and be told what's happening. And don't punish victims. If somebody is successfully phished, if somebody is successfully breached because they made a mistake, don't punish them. Let them know what they did. Understand why it's important. Maybe some extra training, but punishing victims of social engineering, because at some point, all of us have been a successful victim of social engineering. So just if we think that, if I think that one of my staff has done something that I would never ever do myself, I have to keep in mind that, guess what? Maybe not that attack, but some attack has the potential to fool me, right? I'm a human, I make mistakes, I am fallible, all of us are, and we need to make sure that rather than punishing those people, we make them more aware. We continue to work with them and help train them and help them become aware as to the importance of security. Collaboration. Make sure that security is involved at all levels, not just technology, right? Again, physical security, understanding the privacy of our own employees and respecting that. Phone security, when someone calls asking for information, how do we react to that? What's our policy? So security needs to be involved at all levels. And join the fight. If you're not in security, guess what? You probably don't have enough security staff right now anyway. So guess what? You should be involved in this. If you see something, it's one of those great slogans. You see it in airports, and we see it here in DC on the metro. If you see something, say something. Absolutely. If you see something suspicious, report it. Talk to somebody. Even if it's not a security person, get with a manager. Let them know. If you are in management, talk to your security officer. Hey, this happened. What is it? If you don't understand it. If you do understand it, you're like, that's a security breach, then yeah, definitely report that. But get involved. Make sure that, because at the end of the day, it's everyone's responsibility. When I'm teaching introductory security classes like a Security Plus, one of the things I often say is, if for absolutely no other reason, if I didn't have any other reason to think that security was important, and I have plenty of reasons to think security is important, but if there was no other reason, if my company has a severe, serious security breach and loss of data, and our reputation is damaged irreparably, I may not have a job. And I like having a job. So, at its very core, self-preservation should be a reason for security. But there's plenty of reasons. We want our companies to be successful. We want to be secure. We don't want to lose our data. We don't want to lose money. We want things to go well, and there are plenty of people out there that would take it from us if we don't remain vigilant. So what's our personal responsibility? Personal responsibility, password safety still matters, absolutely. Password security, oh man, we gotta make sure that our passwords are secure, that we're not sharing passwords with people. There are a lot of different answers to this question, but what does a secure password look like? You know what, it's one that's hard to guess. They say, historically we always thought like lots of different character types, numbers and capital letters and lowercase letters and special symbols and make them really long and hard to read. That actually leads to more compromise because people then come up with, they end up writing them down somewhere, which is unfortunate because it's hard to remember something with all those different character types and so on and so forth. Newer thinking on this is that you should be using common phrases, right? A sentence as your password. It can be very long, but it's a sentence. Sentences are actually very difficult for brute force engines and password dictionaries to decipher because they are not natural language processors, right? What they're trying to do is they're trying to pattern match. Right? They're jumping, a brute force password attacker is going to sit there and they're going to hammer through every possible combination of characters. Well, to get to the combination of characters that makes up the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog, it's going to take it a very, very, very long time. Nonsensical phrases are even better, even with normal words associated. 5 or 6 character words and stringing 4 of those together, that's an incredibly secure password. So password safety is one of those things, and password security is something that is our personal responsibility. We can, as security folks, we can put requirements in place that your password is a certain length, that you reset it every so often, that it has this level of complexity. Sure, we can do all of that. But at the end of the day, it's up to the end user to protect that password and make sure that the password they come up with is actually secure. So that's personal responsibility. Additionally, treat your computer like it contains valuable company information, because guess what? It does. We're all working from home now, which means we probably brought a laptop that was issued to us by our company home with us, right? If we need to get into the network, there's probably some kind of VPN or other secure way to do that, but it's usually attached in some way to the computer we have. So if I leave my computer unlocked, or if I leave it sitting out at a coffee shop or something like that, and somebody picks it up and takes it with them, I have just compromised massive amounts of highly sensitive data probably about my company. So treat your computer like it's important, because it really truly is. And then finally, be careful with your personal information, because it can and it will be used against you at some point in a social engineering attack. That means what you share on Facebook, what you share on Twitter, what you share on Instagram, putting all your kids' birthdays out on Facebook and then using your kids' birthdays as your passwords. Doesn't take long for an attacker to figure out that correlation. So be very careful with what information you share publicly. We talk about privacy not really existing in the United States anymore, and that is, largely true in my opinion. So be very careful with what you divulge, because if you don't, chances are that's going to be used in some kind of attack on you in the future. So those are 3 big things I think around personal responsibility. That brings us to the end of our presentation, and I will let Jade let us know if there are some questions that I need to answer here.
Yes, there is. So, Mark, with everybody working remotely, do you recommend that all remote workers use VPNs at all times? And what other technology could a company implement to decrease the risk of their remote employees getting scammed?
Absolutely, yeah. The VPN question is a great one. Yes, I recommend that anytime you are on any network that is not a protected office network, you should be using a VPN. Your home private network probably is okay, but I would say, certainly being someone who traveled a lot before this year, using a VPN when I'm in any sort of like a hotel or the airport or anywhere where there's public access available to a network, definitely be using a VPN. There are many of them out there. A lot of them are very good. Even just a brief cursory search of the internet will respond with a lot of really good examples. One that I am, from a personal standpoint, one that I'm a big proponent of, and I'm certainly getting no no financial compensation for saying this, is called NordVPN, N-O-R-D. They have very good offshore proxies. They do not log information, which is a big problem for some VPN providers. That's just one. Like I said, there are many out there, and I definitely suggest doing your research and determining which ones might work for you. Most of them are very inexpensive. There are even a few that are free, but they are usually much slower, and that tends to sort of shy away from things that slow me down. But yes, absolutely, 100%. Especially if you're on a public VPN. But even these days when we're working from home, so much of what we do is in the cloud these days. Not a bad idea to have a personal VPN if you don't have a pass-through VPN through your office.
Okay, so stay out of Starbucks. And let's talk some more about the Security Plus training. Does it cover phishing attacks? And is there a class that a non-IT employee could take that maybe would cover some security fundamentals or a little less intense than Security Plus?
Yes and yes. So Security Plus is, I always kind of call it the mile wide and an inch deep class on security. It does cover a lot of the technical controls and technical aspects of security, but it also definitely covers things like social engineering, so phishing and vishing and tailgating, all of that sort of thing. It is a more technically challenging course. So if you are not an IT person, if you don't have a background in IT and no background at all in security, it might be a little bit on the high end for you. However, we offer a security fundamentals course, which does cover a lot of this sort of thing. Some basic administrative controls, and just some basic familiarity with a lot of the terminology within information security. So knowing what phishing is, knowing what knowing some of the protocols that go into it, understanding those things. But that is a great primer for those folks who are not necessarily IT people, but do want to have a little bit more information. Also, a security awareness program, if you don't have one internally, it is something that we certainly recommend gets developed, so that you do have a way of training folks as they come on board. And something else that we can help with is help to design one of those alongside you. So if that's something you're interested in, also something we can help with.
And what are some of the less common phishing techniques?
Less common phishing techniques. Well, there is one that doesn't get used quite probably as often because it's a little harder to be successful with, and the pool is much smaller. But it's a technique called whaling. Whaling is a phishing technique where people of substantial financial means are targeted. So this would be something where a phishing attempt, if it was coming after a company, would be coming after its senior level executive management, right? It's coming for them either personally or as a way to again gain that foothold where then they can be impersonated to close out bank accounts or talk to the CFO and demand money. So whaling is one that, like I said, it's not as common because again, the success rate is probably somewhat lower. And the reality is of course, again, it's a much smaller pool to begin with. So because phishing is usually such a volume game, whaling is usually not quite as successful. But when it is, obviously the idea there is you're landing a whale. You're getting, if you get one person at that point, then you have likely given yourself a huge payday. So that's one, like I said, it's less common, but it certainly does happen.
Okay, well, I think that is all of the questions for today. Thank you again, Mark. This was very informative, and I hope everyone else feels the same way. I hope that you all can attend another webinar. You can follow us on LinkedIn. We have Twitter, YouTube, where you can watch videos and earn free PDUs. And please come to a course. Mark might even be your instructor. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you, everyone.